Hey everyone, Adam here. I'm really happy to be back with you today and talking about how to bring ROI or return on investment for your clients. And we're not really talking about the client side today, which I've talked about a lot in the providing value. We're talking more about organizational, how to build these goals or principles into your business and what you need to think about as you go and build consistent value or ROI for your clients in every project that you do. So one of the biggest things, you need to make sure you set up consistent and realistic and manageable goals for every project. So part of that process is making sure that you're sitting down with the client, you're talking through them. What you think they understand, you can't guarantee that, right? You need to really fully vet out every project that you work on so their assumptions are correct. If they're not, you need to correct those assumptions, because one of the biggest things that happens from an ROI standpoint is a client is expecting something like a $10,000 website in their mind, but they really are paying $5,000 for a $5,000 website. So they're only getting half of what they think they are. And that creates a bad ROI or a bad perspective right from the get-go, because they don't feel like they got anything for what they're trying to pay. Right? So you need to make sure that you're clarifying what you're delivering, and you need to make sure that any assumption the client has about websites or anything like that, that you understand and you can either target or you can reinforce if it's the correct assumption, right? So that's something you have to really understand from the get-go with clients. Your team or you needs to vet that out. And honestly, my recommendation is always start with the discovery and go through that with the client. It's a paid discovery. Take time, have the client come in, get to know them, build that relationship, understand what they're looking for, and then be able to produce a much more detailed quote that's specifically based on that discovery. So we can talk more about that in the future, but that's something I'd recommend to help meet this need for making sure you're setting up your client and your project for success. One of the biggest things here with return on investment is you need to communicate along the way what's happening, because if you're not communicating, then the client doesn't understand what's happening or doesn't even know things are happening. You need to communicate wins. You need to communicate successes. You need to communicate maybe things that aren't going well or things you overcame in terms of challenges. That will show and be able to communicate that story, that journey. So they're going to be able to understand how far and how much work you've been doing, because they're not there every day looking at you and what you're doing and all these things, but they're having periodic checkpoints, and you need to fill in the gaps for them so they understand where you're coming from. And being transparent doesn't necessarily mean you have to rant and rave and talk about how bad or how difficult things were. It's about just being like, hey, this was going to take us 5 hours. It took us 10 hours to do this work. Hopefully we can make this up in the back end, but we're just letting you know where we stand currently on the project. I wouldn't recommend talking about hours, but at the end of the day, how you're going to communicate to your client, you're going to pay a fixed cost for a website. So maybe you're going to be setting expectations that it's going to come out a little bit later in the timeline. That's not going to hit your launch date. Or you're like, hey, it took us a little more time, but we're still going to hit the deadline. We're going to make up the time elsewhere, or we're going to work overtime to make it happen. Just let you know. But you want to communicate that so they see that involvement and where you're coming from. It doesn't look incompetent. It just shows that things happen. You're going to get it done, and you're going to move on, and you're going to keep it going. That is professionalism, right? So when you put in the right time to do it right, that is really what it's coming back to, is what I just said there. You're doing the right thing. You're putting in the time to do what you need to do to get the project done. And clients are going to see that investment. They're going to feel they got their money's worth, right? When you go to someone and they're like, hey, you know what? I did this, and this, you paid me to do this much, but really I wanted to make sure you're taken care of and everything's good because this could have influenced this. You feel like, wow, that was an amazing experience. They took care of me and I really got a great return on my, investment, aka how much money I paid, right? That's something that you are going to be left with a great impression of, and that's going to continue down the road if you go back to them, because you probably will go back to them because you really value what they do and how they've done it for you. So one of the things that you have to remember is you also are delivering the best solution for long-term success. Now, I previously said in the last video, you need to think short-term then long-term, and that's true. You always have to resolve the immediate problems before you can get to the bigger problems. That's just the case. You have that cascading effect, but you need to make sure you're prepping the client for the long-term solution, making sure that you're not just coming in and putting a band-aid over the wound. You're actually saying, hey, this might need surgery, right? We need to take a step back and think about the big long term, but then you break it out into manageable pieces of phases or projects that the client will be able to understand and really want. And he knows that that automatically will line up for the long-term goal if he's able to bring all these projects in. It might not happen over months, it might be years, but at least you're setting them up for long-term success in that time. And that's going to be another huge factor in being able to build that ROI, that return on investment, is that they're not only getting a project that immediately meets their needs, but you're like, wow, they thought long-term of how we can grow into this, right? That's a huge win, especially for businesses that want to grow or organizations that don't want to have limitations, because it's the worst thing if they built a website and then 2 years later, they have to rebuild the whole entire thing because something that they wanted to do, what they talked about, isn't possible given that platform, right? So don't be that vendor or agency that works with that person. They have to redo it. That creates a bad relationship. You want to be the person who can help them build to that next level and continually working with them. So that's what you need to think about when you want to build ROI, return on investment for your clients. Internally, you need to think about these things and how you're going to set up your team or yourself and how you do the work to build that best ROI. Thanks for tuning in. I know these videos are a bit shorter than the normal format, but I really want to hit these important points. I look forward to questions or any comments. I really, want this to be more of a dialogue format. So if anyone's up there saying, hey, I've done this, but it doesn't show, I'm really happy to create a response or be able to write up more information about this as needed. Don't forget to grow as you go, and we're looking forward to talking with you more.